Welcome back to The Lead and our continuing coverage of the George Zimmerman murder trial. I'm Jake Tapper. The jury has been released for the day. We've learned that the defense could rest its case as early as tomorrow. So the question remains, has the defense done enough to save George Zimmerman from a second-degree murder conviction? And even if he does beat the murder rap, could he still get jail time? Let's go back to our live panel. Linda Kenny-Bodden defended Casey Anthony and Phil Spector. And CNN legal experts Sunny Hostin and Jean Casares both have been in court monitoring the Zimmerman trial. Linda, let's start with the second-degree murder charge. In order to prove that, prosecutors have to show that George Zimmerman acted with a depraved mind when he shot Trayvon Martin. What, if anything, have they done to show evidence of a depraved mind?
About as much as they've done to show that I have a depraved mind, Jake. That charge is not going to fly. Yes, there could be ill will, there could be some spite in terms of how Trayvon was described, but that's not a murder to conviction in this case because George Zimmerman didn't go out intending to hunt someone down because of ill will, spite, because of the race or any other reason. He got into a situation that someone was killed. In my opinion, at most this is manslaughter or aggravated battery.
Jean Casares, what has the defense done to debunk the murder two charge?
I think they've played and replayed the non-emergency 911 call where we hear George Zimmerman's voice talking about and using all the words that the prosecution is using to show that hatred and ill spite, to show that it's just sort of a lackadaisical voice. I mean, that's what you hear. Do want to tell you, though, in the state of Florida, a mandatory lesser included is manslaughter. So it's not discretionary. Manslaughter will go to the jury in this case.
So in other words, the jury will automatically be considering manslaughter whether or not the prosecutor wants them to.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Exactly, by statute.
And the manslaughter charge focuses on negligence. In other words, Zimmerman's own actions.
Culpable negligence.
Culpable negligence. His own actions, his own decisions led to Martin's death. Sunny, what's the key to a manslaughter conviction? How does that happen?
You know, I think the key to it is that it takes that depraved mind off the table. So you don't have to explain what was going on in George Zimmerman's mind. All you have to really prove is that he intentionally committed an act that led to Trayvon Martin's death and that Trayvon Martin is dead. And so I think, you know, most people thought when this case first came up that there was going to be a manslaughter, indictment on manslaughter, because really that is the easier charge to prove. It's always difficult, Jake, as a prosecutor to try to prove an intent crime, a second-degree murder crime, because you've got to get into the person's head. But I disagree with Linda. I don't think that we at this point can say the jury will never convict of second-degree murder because there is evidence of ill will, spite, hatred, using George Zimmerman's very words. And so that's still very much on the table. But as Jean said, they're going to also get manslaughter. And so to suggest that, you know, this case is over and that there isn't going to be a second-degree murder conviction, there is not going to be any conviction, I think that's pushing it a bit.
Let's take a look at another piece of testimony from today. George Zimmerman told police that after he shot Trayvon Martin in the chest at close range, Martin put his hands up and said, "You got me." The question, of course, is that medically possible to say that after you've received this lethal wound? Here's what forensic pathologist Dr. Vincent DeMaio had to say about the human body's ability to not only survive, but fully function after the heart shuts down.
Even if I, right now, reached across, put my hand through your chest, grabbed your heart, and ripped it out, you could stand there and talk to me for 10 to 15 seconds, or walk over to me, because the thing that's controlling your movement and ability to speak is the brain. And that has a reserve supply of 10 to 15 seconds. Now, that's minimum. That assumes no blood is going to the brain.
Linda, that's a rather fantastic description of how the brain controls the body more than the heart does. I don't know if I personally find it all that credible, but do you think that that testimony lends credibility to the notion that George Zimmerman did not over-dramatize what happened after the shooting?
Well, after you get the shock value of thinking about that, which I do think it was a terrible example to say, it is true that you can talk for about 10 seconds after you've been shot. You do have that reserve, so that's possible. I think where he took it a little bit longer was the fact that Trayvon somehow on the ground then could lift himself up and get his arms under his body. I don't think that's possible, and I don't think the jury is going to believe it. They're going to use their common sense. But if somebody shoots you, you can say, not you got me, maybe you shot me. And be incredulous, which would indicate, by the way, that Trayvon knew there was a gun, and that's good for the prosecution.
We're going to take a very quick break and come back with our panel talking about the George Zimmerman murder case. The big question, of course, coming up, should Trayvon Martin's past drug use be allowed in the trial? The judge ruled that the toxicology would be permitted. Discussion on that and look ahead to tomorrow's testimony coming up next. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. The jury has been dismissed for the day, but we are still talking about the George Zimmerman murder trial. I want to bring back the panel for some final thoughts on today's testimony in the murder trial. Linda Kenny Bodden, who defended Casey Anthony and Phil Spector, and of course, CNN legal expert Jean Casares, who has been in the courtroom today monitoring the trial. Jean, after the jury was dismissed yesterday, Judge Deborah Nelson ruled that the defense can submit evidence of Trayvon Martin's marijuana use. Martin's toxicology report showed he had THC in his blood. That's the active ingredient for marijuana. But, Gene, we didn't hear anything about Trayvon Martin's past drug use today. Were you surprised?
I was. I was waiting for the toxicologist because I believe that's who they would call to testify about this. Well, it's not over yet, and so I do think they will call him. And the reason it was allowed in truly is because a case, Florida case law, if it is relevant, as the defense told, and I guess the judge believed it was, it can be reversible error. So if there's a conviction up on appeal, it can be reversed if they don't allow it in. So it makes common sense, and I think the defense will definitely want the jury to hear it.
Linda, let's talk about Trayvon Martin's marijuana use as potential evidence chemically. It can cause paranoia, but it can also cause passive displays. And I'm wondering, how would this be used to prove in any way that George Zimmerman, a victim of Trayvon Martin, could it not cut either way?
Yeah, and you know what? You're dealing now in the modern culture. Let's face it, most of the jurors have kids. Many of our children have used marijuana. There are medical marijuana clinics. People with glaucoma have used medical marijuana. So you may offend jurors by suggesting because Trayvon had a small amount of the marijuana in his system that he would be aggressive. And in fact, I also think, Jake, the reason why they didn't do it with Dr. DeMaio, I was thinking about this, because blood was drawn from the wrong location. It was drawn from the heart, and therefore there would be an increased elevation with the heart blood. It wasn't taken from the femoral artery, and so they may not have wanted to bring it up because the levels were incorrect because.
Gene, a fire and EMS report from that night said that Zimmerman was on 2 medications at the time of the shooting. One of them is a treatment for insomnia. Do you think that should be admissible? The prosecution will fight for it now that the THC in Trayvon Martin has been ruled admissible.
They might, but you know, all of the argument in regard to the medical records was at sidebar. We did not hear it at all. The jury has not heard it at all, as you're saying. So I think at this point, the prosecution, if it had been deemed relevant, I think it could have come in due to the physician's assistant. She did testify, though, that he was seeing a psychologist.
Linda, give us some final thoughts. You've been in the hot seat before in some very high-profile cases. If you were the defense, what would you do to wrap up this case? We're hearing now that they might rest as early as tomorrow.
I would call George Zimmerman's father, who was judge, who was a veteran, and I would have him again reiterate that he thought the voice in the tape was his son, and I would leave it at that. I would not call George Zimmerman to the stand.
And Jean, what do you can expect tomorrow?
I would think a psychologist, and they are having a hearing as we speak to see if a defense animation come before jury what actually happened outside at the T area, and the expert who is testifying right now has state-of-the-art software like what is used in the movies Avatar. He has applied it now to crime scene, and he's making a name for himself nationally.
Jean, you've been in the courtroom Tell us what you're seeing from the jury, because we don't obviously get to see them. Are they reacting? How are they reacting to the testimony? Are they
today?
Go ahead.
What I'm seeing is that they're taking notes, they're looking up, they're taking notes, totally focused to Dr. DeMaio's testimony. I don't care if it's direct or cross-examination, very focused, never drifting at all. And he made it so basic, so you really could understand it clearly. But they are relying one way or the other on what he testified to today.
Would you be looked to right now when it comes to the jury? How would you be trying to read their responses?
Well, you know, that is the worst thing you could possibly do, because you never know what they're thinking. But I'll tell you what, when you enter the well, if they look at you, if they smile, if they stand when you stand, then you think you have an in with them. But you never know.
Sabrina Fulton, Linda, Trayvon Martin's mother, she left shortly before she showed more photos from her son's autopsy. Seeing the mother walk out, that must have an impact on the jury.
Oh, you know, no matter what the result of this case is a tragedy. A mother has lost her son. She was an incredible witness. In my opinion, for the prosecution, she was their best witness, because she just was, she emotional. I don't explain, but she seemed so real, and this death of her son was real to her. So she was the best witness for the prosecution, and no matter what the result, our hearts have to go out to her.
And that's right. It is absolutely a real tragedy, what happened here. Make sure to follow me.